The night my wife told me she was done sleeping with me, I didn't cry, I didn't beg, I didn't even argue. I just looked her dead in the eye and said one word. Okay. What she didn't know was that single word was about to cost her everything. But let me back up, because the story of how I dismantled my own marriage to save myself starts way before that Tuesday night in October. My wife Mira and I had been married for 6 years, and for the first 4, I genuinely thought we were one of those couples who'd actually figured it out. We had our little routines, our inside jokes, our Friday night tradition of trying new restaurants and rating them like we were food critics, our Sunday morning coffee ritual where we'd just sit on the porch and talk about nothing and everything at the same time. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours, and I believed we were building something that would last forever. Then somewhere around year 5, things started shifting in ways I couldn't quite put my finger on at first, like when you notice a crack in the wall, but convince yourself it's nothing serious. Mira started coming home later from work, started spending more time on her phone with this weird protective angle where I couldn't see the screen, started canceling our weekend plans with vague excuses about being tired or needing alone time. I tried talking to her about it multiple times, asking if something was wrong, if work was stressing her out, if we needed to see a couples counselor, but she'd always brush me off with the same line about just being overwhelmed and needing space. I gave her that space, I really did, because I thought that's what a good husband does, but I was just giving her room to drift further away. Then her best friend Sable entered the picture in a much bigger way. Now, Sable had always been around, but suddenly she was over at our house constantly, like 3 or 4 nights a week. Here's the thing about Sable that I need you to understand. She'd been divorced 3 times, and somehow convinced herself that this made her an expert on relationships rather than someone who clearly couldn't maintain one. Every time she showed up, she and Mira would disappear into the bedroom or go out on the patio, and I'd hear these hushed, intense conversations that would stop the second I came anywhere near. After each visit from Sable, Mira would be noticeably colder to me, more distant, more dismissive of anything I said or did. It was like Sable was slowly poisoning her against me, dripping little bits of toxic advice into her ear about how she deserved better, how marriage was just settling, how men are all the same eventually. I started calling Sable the marriage killer in my head because everywhere she went, relationships seemed to die. By month 6 of this downward spiral, Mira had checked out of our marriage completely. We went from sleeping in the same bed every night to her claiming she needed the guest room because I apparently snored too loud, which was news to me after 5 years of her never mentioning it. She stopped asking about my day, stopped laughing at my jokes, stopped initiating any kind of physical contact. I tried everything I could think of to reconnect with her. I planned a surprise weekend getaway to this cabin in the mountains she'd always wanted to visit, but she canceled last minute saying she had too much work. I bought her this beautiful necklace for our anniversary that I'd been saving up for, and she barely looked at it before putting it in a drawer. I suggested couples therapy again, and she laughed in my face like it was the most ridiculous thing she'd ever heard. Every attempt I made to save our marriage was met with either indifference or outright hostility, and I was starting to feel like I was living with a stranger who just happened to look like my wife. Then the really obvious signs started appearing, the kind you can't ignore even if you want to. Mira suddenly had a whole new wardrobe of clothes I'd never seen her buy, tighter dresses and outfits that seemed designed for someone else's eyes, not mine. She changed her hairstyle to something more dramatic and started wearing makeup to work when she'd always been more of a natural look person. Her phone became like a third party in our marriage, always there, always demanding her attention, always more important than anything I had to say. She started having these networking events that required her to dress up and come home at midnight smelling like expensive wine and cologne that definitely wasn't mine. I'd see receipts from restaurants we'd never been to together, charges on our joint credit card for hotels in our own city, which made no sense unless you considered the one explanation I was desperately trying not to consider. And then there was this name that kept popping up, Dorian. Dorian texted her at weird hours. Dorian needed her input on projects at times when normal coworkers wouldn't be working. Dorian seemed to have unlimited access to my wife's time and attention in ways that I no longer did. The breaking point came on a Tuesday night in October, a completely ordinary evening that turned into the moment everything changed. I'd made dinner, nothing fancy, just pasta the way she used to like it, and I'd set the table hoping maybe we could have an actual conversation for once. Mira came home late again, barely acknowledged the food, and went straight to her phone. I asked her, as calmly as I could manage, if we could please just talk about what was happening between us, because I felt like I was losing her and I needed to understand why. That's when she looked up at me with this expression I'd never seen before, this mixture of contempt and exhaustion, and said the words that would echo in my head for months. "I'm not sleeping with you anymore, Rowan. That part of our marriage is over. You're basically just my roommate now. Deal with it." The way she said it was so casual, so matter-of-fact, like she was telling me she decided to switch brands of coffee or something equally insignificant. I stood there in our kitchen, looking at this woman I'd promised to love forever, and something inside me just went cold and clear. I didn't yell, I didn't argue, I didn't beg. I just looked at her and said, "Okay," in the calmest voice I've ever used, and then I walked out of the kitchen, went to our bedroom, grabbed my laptop, and started planning. You see, Mira thought deal with it meant I'd just accept this new reality, that I'd become her convenient roommate who paid half the bills while she did whatever she wanted with whoever she wanted. But what she didn't understand was that I was going to deal with it, just not in any way she expected. I called my best friend Talon, told him I needed a place to crash for a while, and he told me his guest room was mine for as long as I needed it. That same night, I started moving my essential stuff out bit by bit while Mira was in the other room, oblivious to the fact that her casual cruelty had just activated a side of me she didn't know existed. Over the next few days, I moved like a ghost through our house, gathering documents, making copies of important papers, taking photos of anything that might be relevant later. I opened a separate bank account at a different bank and quietly started redirecting my direct deposit there, leaving just enough in our joint account to cover my half of the bills and avoid raising immediate suspicion. Then I did something I probably should have done years ago. I sat down and read through our prenuptial agreement, the one we'd signed back when we were young and in love and thought we'd never need it. And there it was, in black and white legalese, the clause that Mira had apparently forgotten about or never bothered to read carefully. In the event of proven infidelity, the unfaithful party forfeits their claim to marital assets and spousal support. My lawyer father had insisted on including it, and young, naive me had felt almost guilty about it at the time. But sitting there reading it 6 years later, I felt nothing but cold, calculated gratitude. Mira had just handed me the keys to dismantling everything she thought was secure, and she didn't even know it yet. The game had changed, and for the first time in months, I was the one holding all the cards. Living at Talon's place gave me the clarity I desperately needed, and having him there as a sounding board made all the difference in what came next. Talon wasn't just my best friend since college. He was the kind of guy who saw through nonsense instantly and had zero tolerance for people who played games with other people's lives. When I told him everything that had been happening, he didn't waste time with sympathy or trying to see both sides. He just looked at me and said I needed concrete proof before I made any moves. That's when he pulled out this small voice-activated recorder from his desk drawer, the kind that private investigators use, and told me it was time to stop being naive and start protecting myself. I'd never considered recording Mira. It felt like crossing some line I couldn't uncross. But then I remembered her face when she told me I was just a roommate, and that hesitation disappeared. The car was registered in both our names, and I'd been making half the payments on it, so legally, it was as much mine as hers. I planted the recorder in our car the next morning, tucked it under the passenger seat where she'd never think to look, and then I waited. For 3 days, I got nothing useful, just her singing along to music and making work calls that sounded normal. But on day 4, I hit absolute gold, the kind of evidence that would make any divorce attorney salivate. Sable was in the car with her, and they were talking like I didn't exist, like I was some inconvenient obstacle they were strategizing around. Myra's voice came through crystal clear, talking about Dorian, about how he was everything I wasn't, about how being with him made her feel alive again in ways she'd forgotten were possible. Then Sable asked the question that made my blood run cold, whether Dorian knew Mira was still legally married. Mira laughed and said she'd told Dorian we were separated and basically divorced already, that I was just dragging my feet on signing papers. The lies were so casual, so effortless, like she'd been practicing them for months. But the worst part, the part that really destroyed whatever feelings I had left, was when Sable asked her directly if she felt guilty, and Mira said no, that she'd stopped feeling guilty months ago because I was boring and predictable and she deserved someone who excited her. I listened to that recording 5 times in Talon's guest room. Each time it hurt a little less and made me more determined. Talon's reaction when I played it for him was what I needed. Pure, unfiltered rage on my behalf. The kind of loyalty that reminds you why some friendships last forever. He immediately started helping me build a case that would be bulletproof. We created a detailed timeline of everything suspicious, every late night, every unexplained charge, every work event that didn't add up. I started screenshotting text messages before Mira could delete them, downloading bank statements showing charges to restaurants and hotels I'd never been to, documenting every single inconsistency in her stories. Then Talon had another idea that felt a bit extreme but turned out to be crucial. He had a buddy who did private investigation work, and for a reasonable fee, this guy could follow Mira for a few days and document where she went during these supposed networking events. The photos came back within a week, and they were damning. Mira and Dorian at a hotel downtown, the kind with hourly rates that nobody uses for legitimate business meetings. Mira and Dorian having dinner at this upscale Italian place, holding hands across the table like teenagers. Mira and Dorian in his car in a parking garage, and I'll spare you the details, but it was crystal clear what was happening. Each photo felt like a punch to the gut, but weirdly, they also felt like ammunition, like I was building an arsenal that would protect me from whatever manipulation she'd try to throw at me later. I took everything to a divorce attorney that Talon recommended, a woman named Jennifer who had a reputation for being ruthless in court but fair. When I spread out all my evidence on her desk, the audio recordings, the photos, the receipts, the timeline, the text message screenshots, she smiled and told me this was the most thorough documentation she'd seen in years. She said cases like this, with a prenup and this level of proof, were about as close to a guaranteed win as you could get in family court. Jennifer walked me through what would happen when I filed. Mira would be served at her workplace, which would be humiliating but necessary to prevent her from hiding assets or destroying evidence once she knew what was coming. The prenup with its infidelity clause meant she'd get nothing. No claim to the house we'd bought together, no spousal support, just whatever personal items she could prove were solely hers. Jennifer asked me if I was sure I wanted to go through with it, because once we filed, there was no going back and things would get ugly fast. I didn't hesitate. I told her to file the papers immediately. 2 days later, Jennifer called me with news that made everything real. Mira had been served with divorce papers at her office, right in front of her coworkers during their afternoon meeting, and according to the process server, her reaction had been somewhere between shock and complete panic. Within an hour of being served, my phone started blowing up. Mira called 17 times in a row, each call going straight to voicemail because I'd blocked her number right after filing. Then she started texting from different numbers, from Sable's phone, from coworkers' phones, each message more frantic and desperate than the last. She showed up at Talon's apartment that same night, pounding on the door and demanding to talk to me, screaming about how I couldn't just throw away 6 years of marriage without even discussing it with her first. The irony of that statement wasn't lost on me, considering she'd been throwing away our marriage for months without discussing anything with me. Talon handled it perfectly. He opened the door with his phone already recording video and calmly told her she had 60 seconds to leave the property before he called the cops for harassment and trespassing. She tried to push past him, tried to physically force her way into the apartment, and that's when I stepped into view behind him. The look on her face when she saw me standing there was something I'll never forget. This mixture of desperation and rage and confusion, like she couldn't understand how her boring, predictable husband had suddenly grown a spine. That's when I did something I'd been planning for this moment. I pulled out my phone, opened the audio file of her conversation with Sable in the car, and pressed play. Her own voice filled the hallway, talking about Dorian, about lying to him about our marriage status, about how I was boring and she deserved someone better. I watched all the color drain from her face as she realized how screwed she was. She tried to grab my phone, tried to claim the recording was illegal and wouldn't hold up in court, tried every desperate play she could think of in the moment. But Talon just calmly stated that we were in a one-party consent state, which meant recordings made in jointly owned property were legal and admissible in court, and that my attorney had already confirmed everything was above board. Then Sable showed up, because of course she did, and tried to spin this whole situation like I was the villain for spying on my own wife. That's when Talon destroyed her with a single sentence that I wish I'd recorded. You've been divorced 3 times, and you're giving marriage advice? That's like taking driving lessons from someone who's totaled every car they've owned. The confrontation ended with Mira in tears on the hallway floor, Sable trying to console her while shooting daggers at me and Talon firmly closing the door on both of them and locking it. Inside the apartment, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: complete control over my own life. My phone kept buzzing with messages from Myra's family, particularly her mother, who apparently thought screaming at me through text messages would somehow change my mind or make me feel guilty. I saved every single message as they came in, forwarded them all to Jennifer for documentation, and then did something that felt incredibly satisfying. I sent Myra's mother the entire evidence package, every photo, every recording transcript, every receipt, with a simple message that just said, "This is why." She went silent after that. And from what I heard later through mutual friends, she told Mira to sign whatever papers I put in front of her because fighting this would only make things worse, more public, and way more expensive for everyone involved. The next 3 months were a masterclass in watching someone's life unravel while mine slowly rebuilt itself from the ground up. Myra's lawyers tried everything they could to fight the prenup, claiming it was signed under duress or that the infidelity clause was unreasonably harsh or whatever other legal gymnastics they thought might work. But Jennifer shut down every single attempt with the kind of precision that made me grateful I'd hired her. The evidence was too solid, the prenup was ironclad, and most importantly, Mira had no leg to stand on because she'd been caught red-handed in ways that left zero room for interpretation. Her legal team eventually advised her to just sign the settlement agreement and move on, because dragging this out in court would only cost her more money she didn't have and expose her affair even more publicly than it already was. The actual signing happened at Jennifer's office on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, and part of me was dreading seeing Mira again after 3 months of silence between us. She walked into that conference room looking completely different from the woman I'd married. Thinner, older somehow, with dark circles under her eyes and this defeated posture that would have made me feel sorry for her if I hadn't remembered everything she'd done. She tried the waterworks immediately, crying about how she'd made terrible mistakes and how we could still fix this if I'd just give her one more chance. I looked at her across that conference table and felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, just this cold indifference that I think hurt her more than any emotional reaction would have. Jennifer guided us through the paperwork with professional efficiency, and when it came time for Mira to sign, she hesitated, looking at me one last time like I might suddenly change my mind. I just stared back and waited. She signed. Just like that, 6 years of marriage ended with a signature on a legal document. What happened to Mira after the divorce was finalized was almost poetic in how everything fell apart for her. Dorian, her exciting affair partner who made her feel so alive, dumped her within 2 weeks of our divorce being finalized. Turns out he was only interested in the thrill of an affair, the forbidden aspect of sneaking around, and once she was available and came with the baggage of a messy divorce, he wanted nothing to do with her. She tried to keep him, from what I heard through mutual friends, calling and texting constantly and showing up at his place unannounced, but he'd already moved on to someone new. And Sable, her toxic best friend who'd encouraged all of this, completely ghosted her once the drama died down. See, people like Sable don't care about their friends. They care about chaos and drama and having someone vulnerable to manipulate. And once Mira was no longer in crisis mode and couldn't provide entertainment, Sable just vanished. Mira ended up moving into a small one-bedroom apartment across town, the kind of place that was a massive downgrade from the house we'd built our life in. And from what I gathered through the grapevine, she spent most of her time alone trying to figure out where everything went so wrong. Meanwhile, my life was improving in ways I hadn't imagined possible during those dark months of watching my marriage fall apart. I bought a new house about 6 months after the divorce was finalized, nothing huge, but it was mine, with no memories of Mira attached to any room. I adopted a dog from the local rescue, a 3-year-old German Shepherd mix named Rocky, who had more loyalty in his furry body than Mira had shown in 6 years of marriage. Talon and I started a consulting business together, something we'd talked about doing for years but never had the courage to pursue, and it took off faster than either of us expected. Having a project to focus on, something separate from my failed marriage, gave me purpose and direction I desperately needed. I started going to the gym regularly, not because I was trying to prove anything to anyone, but because it felt good to take care of myself again. I went on a few dates here and there, nothing serious, just reminding myself what it felt like to have someone interested in getting to know me rather than just tolerating my presence. About 8 months after the divorce, Mira started trying to contact me again. It started with a simple text asking how I was doing, which I ignored. Then came longer messages about how she'd been doing therapy and realized what she'd thrown away. Then came messages about self-improvement and how she understood now that she'd sabotaged the best thing in her life. Each message got progressively more desperate, trying different angles to get some kind of response from me. She tried nostalgia, reminding me of good times we'd had. She tried guilt, talking about how lonely she was. She even tried anger, accusing me of being cold and unforgiving. None of it worked because I'd done something crucial during those months after the divorce. I completely detached from her and everything we'd been. She was just a person I used to know, someone from my past who no longer had any power over my present or future. The final contact I had with anything related to Mira was almost a year after the divorce, when I ran into her at a coffee shop completely by accident. She was there with someone, a guy who looked uncomfortable and kept checking his phone like he was looking for an escape route. She saw me walk in, and I watched her face go through this journey of emotions: surprise, hope, fear, resignation. I gave her a polite nod, the kind you'd give any stranger, ordered my coffee, and left without saying a word. I didn't feel triumphant or vindicated or even particularly satisfied. I just felt free. That night, I got one last text from her, just 3 words: "I'm sorry, Rowan." I read it, thought about responding for maybe 5 seconds, and then deleted it without replying. Some apologies come too late. Some betrayals are too fundamental to forgive, and some chapters of your life need to stay closed. Looking back now, almost 2 years after that Tuesday night when she told me to deal with being her roommate, I can say with complete honesty that her telling me that was the best thing she could have done for me. It forced me to see clearly what I'd been trying to ignore for months. It gave me the push I needed to value myself enough to walk away, and it led me to a life that's infinitely better than the one I was settling for. I'm not bitter anymore. I'm not angry. I'm just grateful that I had the strength to deal with it the way I did. My life now is mine, built on my terms, surrounded by people who value me. And that's worth more than any marriage held together by obligation and one person's willingness to accept scraps of affection. If you're reading this and you're in a situation where someone treats you like you're disposable, like you're just there for their convenience, I hope you find the strength to deal with it too, because you deserve so much better than being someone's backup plan. What do you think about this story? Let me know in the comments, drop a like, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories.